We all remember Queen Cleopatra VII, lover of Caesar and the last pharaoh of Egypt. But what about her children who were left behind after her death? You may be surprised to know that one of them even ended up ruling a Roman client kingdom. Cleopatra's descendants may even still live among us. Today, we're going to explore the lives of Cleopatra's three children who survived the fall of their family. We're going to dig deep into what history and archaeologists tell us about them through historical records, coins, poems, and a grand tomb overlooking the sea in modern Algeria. If this sounds like it's right up your trench, stay tuned to dig in to this fascinating story of resilience and survival. First, let's set the scene. Cleopatra VII gave birth to four children. Her first son, Ptolemy Caesar, fathered by Julius Caesar, was born when she was 23 or 24 years old and is known to history by his nickname of Caesarion. 7 years later, she gave birth to a pair of fraternal twins sired by Mark Antony, who shortly afterward married and had two daughters with Octavia, Julius Caesar's nephew heir, who would become the first Roman emperor. The boy twin was named Alexander Helios after Alexander the Great and the sun, and the girl was named Cleopatra Selene after her mother and the moon. The twins didn't meet their father until they were 3 years old, when their mother brought them to Antioch to support Antony's planned campaign to conquer the Parthian Empire. At this time, he confirmed their paternity, and it was probably at this meeting that the couple's last child was conceived. Born in 36 BCE, he was called Ptolemy Antony Philadelphus. All of Cleopatra's children grew up in Alexandria. We don't know much about the day-to-day of their childhoods, with the exceptions of the names of some of their tutors, and it's assumed that they were all given a rigorous education studying at the Museum, including the Library of Alexandria, in one of the most scholarly and academic cities of the world. Cleopatra Selene probably received the same education as her brothers, as Macedonian royal families were known to educate both their sons and daughters. After Antioch, the next major historical event the younger children show up in, is the donations of Alexandria in 34 BCE. This was a political festival staged by Mark Antony imitating a Roman triumph, to celebrate his victory over the Armenians and downplay his failure to conquer Parthia. For the finale, the whole city was summoned into the Gymnasium of Alexandria, where Cleopatra and Antony, dressed as Isis Aphrodite and Dionysus Osiris, sat on golden thrones. They may or may not have been married at this ceremony as well. Caesarion was depicted as Horus, son of Isis, while the other children were also present and decked out in royal attire, much more lavishly than this screenshot from a recent documentary about Cleopatra. This is one of actually my biggest beefs with shows like this, is that I guess due to costume and budget constraints, they don't really show you the level of opulence that these people were dressing in. The finale of this faux triumph began with Antony confirming Cleopatra as Queen of Egypt, Cyprus, Libya, and central Syria, drawing on her ancestral heritage with the Seleucid Empire, who had previously ruled in Syria and other parts of the Persian Empire. Then he named Alexander Helios king of Armenia, Media, and Parthia, and any countries yet to be discovered between the Euphrates and Indus rivers, which is a bit presumptuous considering he hadn't even conquered those places yet. Cleopatra Selene became queen of Cyrenaica and Libya, and Ptolemy Philadelphos king of Syria, Phoenicia, and Sicilia. Caesarion was proclaimed the son and legitimate heir of the deified Julius Caesar, king of kings and king of Egypt, ruling alongside his mother. Interestingly, this was the second of two such donations. A similar ceremony had taken place at Antioch previously, at which time the donations enjoyed Rome's approval of the Antonine strategy of dominating the East by exploiting Cleopatra's unique royal Ptolemaic lineage in the donated territories. Like I said, it's her connections to the Seleucid family that the Ptolemies had been intermarrying with that they were exploiting. However, this wasn't the case the second time around. When Antony sent an announcement of the donations of Alexandria to Rome, hoping that the Senate would approve them, they refused, led by Octavian, his brother-in-law, Julius Caesar's nephew, and importantly, his officially recognized heir, whose political position was threatened by the recognition of Caesarion as the biological son and heir of Julius Caesar. Octavian's base of power was his connection to Caesar through adoption, and this gave him much needed popularity and the loyalty of the legions. Not to mention the fact that, as I said, Mark Antony was married to his sister. In response to Antony's audacity, Octavian stepped up his personal attacks on Antony and Cleopatra, and their official political alliance between Octavian and Antony expired on the last day of 33 BCE. Thus began the last war of the Roman Republic, with Octavian's victory in 30 BCE ending the 300-year rule of the Ptolemies in Egypt, killing Antony and Cleopatra, absorbing their kingdom as a new territory, and eventually ushering in the era of imperial Rome. After losing and fleeing the famous Battle of Actium earlier in the war, Cleopatra had attempted to safeguard and save her children once she realized that she was probably going to lose. At first, she actually attempted to negotiate to abdicate the throne and have Caesarion replace her as sole ruler while she went into exile, but this was not meant to be. The other 3 children were sent south to Thebes, but were apprehended by Roman soldiers en route and brought back to Alexandria. Plutarch, writing around 100 years after these events took place, says that after Octavian invaded Egypt, Caesarion was sent by his mother with much treasure to go to India via Ethiopia. But his tutor persuaded him to go back, and when he did, he was captured by Octavian, who did seem to briefly consider letting him live as a client king of Egypt. However, according to Plutarch, when Octavian was reminded that too many Caesars is not necessarily a good thing, he changed his mind and had his 14-year-old cousin executed and then assumed absolute control of Egypt. But this still left 3 other royal children to deal with, the 10-year-old twins and their 5-year-old brother. Not only were they half Roman, but also at a tender enough age that their execution would have made Octavian look pretty bad. It's key to remember that while Mark Antony was dead, his family was still a prominent clan in Rome who claimed descent from the hero Hercules. The children were brought back to Rome and paraded through the streets in heavy golden chains as a part of Octavian's military triumph. The chains are recorded as having been so heavy that the children couldn't walk, prompting reactions of sympathy from the crowds. Then the children were entrusted to the care of Octavia, Octavian's sister and Mark Antony's former wife, to raise in her home on Palatine Hill. She was mother to their half-sisters Antonia Major and Minor, as well as the guardian of Mark Antony's other son, who also survived their parents' death, by his first wife, Fulvia. Octavia is a fascinating figure in her own right as a powerful Roman woman who very much held power behind the scenes. Through her daughters with Mark Antony, she was ancestress to the Roman emperors Claudius, Caligula, and Nero. After being given to Octavia, the children aren't mentioned again in the historical sources until the teenage Cleopatra Selene was engaged and wed to Juba II around 5 years later in 25 BCE, so roughly when she was around 15, 16 years old. Her husband had also come from a family and kingdom conquered by Rome. Juba's father, the king of Numidia, which was spread across the northern parts of modern Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, died in 46 BCE after rebelling against Rome. And Juba was also paraded through the streets of Rome. However, at the time he was a baby, so he wouldn't have remembered the experience. And he was then sent to be raised in Julius Caesar and then Octavian's households. It's entirely possible that he and Cleopatra knew each other prior to their engagement. The fate of Ptolemy Philadelphus and Alexander Helios is unknown. The only further mention of them comes from Cassius Dio, who states that Octavian, now known as Augustus, spared the lives of Cleopatra's brothers as a wedding gift to her. However, Cassius Dio is writing around 150 years after this happened, and we have no contemporary sources that mention them after they were taken to Rome prior to the marriage. Did Octavian have them killed? Did they succumb to childhood illness? Did they live quietly in exile in their sister's custody until their own deaths? It's impossible to know without more evidence or a time machine. Whatever happened to her brothers, Cleopatra Selene and her husband were, by this time, trusted members of the imperial family, which is a bit of a paradox or contradictory when you consider that this imperial family was the cause of her parents' death. That's got to be a really weird relationship going on there. If you want to read the definitive biography of her life, you should check out this book, Cleopatra's Daughter by Julia Draycott. It's nonfiction, and it was basically my primary source and inspiration for making this video. I highly recommend it. Or if you're looking for a good historic fiction book, so it's a bit of a lighter read, Cleopatra's Daughter by Michelle Moran is a fictionalized portrayal of her life growing up in Rome. Both of these books, and everything that you see on my shelf, are listed in my Amazon storefront, linked in the description of this video. After their wedding, Juba and Cleopatra Selene were sent to rule Mauretania, which corresponds to parts of modern-day Algeria and Morocco, and included western parts of Juba's ancestral home of Numidia. To commemorate this occasion, the poet Crinagoras of Mytilene wrote the following epigram. Great neighboring regions of the world, which divides the Nile, swollen from black Ethiopia divides. You have created common kings for both through marriage, making one race of Egyptians and Libyans. Let the children of kings in turn hold from their fathers a strong rule over both lands. Upon arriving in their new home, the couple renamed their capital Caesarea Mauretania, or Caesarea for short, in honor of Augustus, sometimes called Caesar as well. It now lies between modern Seychelles in Algeria. They then set about taming their new territory, which was vast but lacked organization. It's generally accepted that they were joint rulers to some degree, or that, at the very least, Cleopatra Selene exercised great influence on her husband's policies and had an aptitude for governance inherited from her mother. And while she was officially a Roman queen, she never forgot where she came from. Juba and Cleopatra imported many important advisors, scholars, and artists from Alexandria to serve in Caesarea, as well as developing the kingdom's trade, exporting a significant amount of goods throughout the Mediterranean region, particularly with Spain and Italy. Mauritanian products included fish, grapes, pearls, figs, grain, wooden furniture, and purple dye harvested from shellfish. Cleopatra's influence can also be seen in the couple's building projects, as construction and sculptural projects from Mauretania at this time display a mix of ancient Egyptian, Greek, and Roman art and architectural styles. This includes a lighthouse in the same style as the famous Pharos Lighthouse of Alexandria, a seafront royal palace, and numerous temples dedicated to Roman and Egyptian deities. This vigorous promotion of her heritage and her mother's legacy stands in sharp contrast to the negative image of Cleopatra that was being spread in contemporary Augustan poetry back in Rome. It hints that while Cleopatra on the surface paid lip service to her foster family, but when she was back home in her own kingdom, she felt safe enough to honor her mother. Together, she and her husband had one son, named Ptolemy, born in 10 BCE and named after his mother's dynasty. The bust of him that you see here can be found in the Vatican. It is possible that Juba and Cleopatra also had a daughter, as an inscription in Athens mentions a daughter of Juba, but her name hasn't survived, and this is the only mention that we have of her. Cleopatra Selene is best represented in the archaeological record by coins minted during her and her husband's reign. We have found 84 coins that feature her and whose dates span a 48-year period from 25 BCE to 23 CE. Out of this assemblage, 78 of them are joint coinages depicting her and her husband, but 6 of them show Cleopatra Selene alone. They were minted in Caesarea and were mostly found in the 1907 Banassa hoard in Morocco. This assemblage further hints that she was her husband's co-ruler and not a mere consort, since she was minting coins in her own name. Also visible within her coinage are more ties back to her Greek and Egyptian heritage. While her husband's portraits are labeled in Latin, Cleopatra's are labeled in Greek, and they use the Greek title of Basilissa, which we usually translate to mean queen. This title was used by her female ancestors, including her mother, who also ruled in their own right in Egypt. Her coins make use of Egyptian iconography by featuring the headdress, sistrum, and bull of the Egyptian goddess Isis, and depictions of crocodiles, an animal connected to the Egyptian god Sobek, and which was a symbol favored by the Ptolemaic dynasty. Through her coins, Cleopatra Selene communicated a political, cultural, and dynastic message that subverted Augustan representations and emphasized her multicultural background. Notably, the value and quality of Mauretanian coins became recognized throughout the Roman Empire during Juba and Cleopatra's reign. There are several busts of a female ruler that have been found that date to the right era at Caesarea, which might and probably do portray Cleopatra Selene. However, we can't say for sure because it's also probable that they might be of her mother. I also want to highlight here two other depictions that might probably are her. And the only reason I'm saying might instead of they are her is because they don't come with helpful labeled inscriptions saying who they're depicting. First is a gilded silver dish in the Louvre, part of the collection of Roman treasure found at the Bosco Reale villa near Pompeii in 1895. It depicts a woman in high relief wearing the scalp of an elephant. On one breast is an asp and on the other a panther. My panther insists on joining us for this next bit. Say hello. On her right shoulder is a lion, while on her left she holds a cornucopia topped by a crescent moon. Engraved on it are images of the sun in the form of a youth dressed in a short cloak, with the hairstyle of Alexander the Great, the head surrounded by rays, a possible link to Alexander Helios. The viper and the pantheress seem to be linked together and meant to be portrayed as symbols of fertility rather than the suicide of Cleopatra VII. The elephant scalp that the figure wears could also refer to Cleopatra Selene's status as a ruler in Africa. Arranged below the woman are religious and mythological symbols, including the sistrum of Isis and the quiver and club of Hercules, both of which are connected to her family. The piece has a complex visual symbolism that points consistently to a North African context, and many of the symbols used on the dish also appear in the coinage of Juba II. These symbols can be read as references to the Ptolemaic royal house and specifically Cleopatra Selene. If you were to ask me, I think that's definitely her that's on that plate. I don't know who else it could really be. The second potential portrait of Cleopatra Selene can be seen on the Era Pacis Augustae, an altar in Rome dedicated to the Pax Romana and commissioned to honor the return of Augustus to Rome and consecrated in 9 BCE. One side of it depicts members of the Julio-Claudian imperial family in a processional frieze, and it has been suggested that two of these figures, a woman and a young child, are Cleopatra Selene and her son. These two figures wear fringed mantles, usually dyed purple and fringed in gold, an article of clothing usually associated with Hellenistic royalty, i.e. it's not something you'd expect a Roman member of the family to wear. Not to mention that at this time, Mauretania was one of the sources of the purple dye. Unfortunately, the woman's face is too damaged to make out any other features that would connect her to Cleopatra, but the child's face does have a small resemblance to the portraits of Juba and later Ptolemy. Given their close relationship to the imperial family, it's entirely possible as well that Cleopatra and her son would have traveled to Rome for the altar's consecration. Juba and Cleopatra ruled Mauretania together until her death, but we're not sure exactly when this happened, even though, once again, the poet Crinagoras composed an epigram to mark the occasion. The moon herself grew dark, rising at sunset, covering her suffering in the night, because she saw her beautiful namesake, Selene, breathless, descending to Hades. With her she had had the beauty of her light in common, and mingled her own darkness with her death. If this poem isn't simply literary license, it could be that, in a unique coincidence, Selene's death coincided with a lunar eclipse. However, there were 9 lunar eclipses between 9 BCE and 14 CE that could be connected with her death. Determining the exact date is further complicated by the fact that her joint coinage with her husband was issued until he died in 23 CE. A hoard of these coins has been dated to 17 CE, and some scholars think that she was alive to mint them. This is contradicted by the fact that Juba married a woman called Glaphyra of Cappadocia around 6 or 7 CE. This complicates it because Juba was a thoroughly Romanized king. Like, he grew up in the household of Julius Caesar and Octavian, and he was a Roman client king as well. And Roman law only allowed monogamous marriages. So taking a second wife while his first was still alive just doesn't really track. This has led most scholars to conclude that Cleopatra Selene died sometime around 5 BCE. This year had a lunar eclipse that closely matches her funerary epigram. And even if Juba did marry a second wife, it didn't turn out very well for him because she promptly fell in love with someone else and left him. It's also notable that Glaphyra did not appear in Juba II's double portrait coinage and issued no autonomous coins of her own, although that's possibly because their marriage was so short. Regardless of what year she actually died, Cleopatra Selene was interred in a mausoleum built by Juba as a dynastic funeral monument for their royal descendants. Juba was buried there with her after his own death in 23 CE. The Roman geographer Pomponius Mela mentioned the mausoleum around 40 CE as a communal tomb of the royal family. Today, the monument known as the Royal Mausoleum of Mauretania in Cherchell, Algeria, is assumed to be this tomb. While the architectural design of the mausoleum resembles other Numidian tombs in the area, it also draws inspiration from the Mausoleum of Augustus in Rome, which has led to some speculation that they were both actually designed after the tomb of Alexander the Great in Alexandria. Compared to the other North African mausoleums, this design is more Hellenized, more Greek. It features 60 Ionic columns surmounted by a frieze and a cornice. 4 false stone doors, each over 6 meters high, are located at the cardinal points in the colonnade. The eastern door leads to an antechamber decorated with a carving of a lion and a lioness. There are niches along the gallery walls at intervals for lamps, and in the central chamber. There are 2 niches designed for similar purposes or for crematory vases. It was robbed long ago, and nothing definitively connecting Cleopatra and her husband to this monument has been found. It's even been suggested that it was meant to be a memorial to them rather than an actual tomb, but again, without further evidence, we don't know. After his father's death, their son Ptolemy then reigned until 40 CE when he was executed by Emperor Caligula, his mother's great-nephew. Caligula's successor, Emperor Claudius, took advantage of Ptolemy's lack of male heirs and assumed control of Mauretania and then fully absorbed it into the Roman Empire as a province. The last recorded descendant of the Ptolemies is Drusilla, a Mauretanian princess who is probably the daughter of Ptolemy. The Roman historian Tacitus calls her the granddaughter of Antony and Cleopatra. However, considering that she is mentioned a few decades after Juba's death, it's more likely that she is Ptolemy's daughter and Cleopatra Selene's granddaughter. She was presumably brought into the imperial household on her father's execution and the annexation of his kingdom, and in her teens, Emperor Claudius married her to Marcus Antonius Felix, a Greek freedman who was the Roman governor of Judea, bringing her back to the area around Syria. Around a year later, he divorced her as he fell in love with and married a different princess, also helpfully called Drusilla. After this, the life of the Mauretanian Drusilla and any further descendants of the Ptolemies are virtually impossible to trace with any certainty. It has been suggested that she remarried the priest king of Emesa, modern Homs in Syria, and became his queen consort. They may have had a son who later succeeded his father and had children. A couple hundred years later, Zenobia, queen of Palmyra, claimed to be descended from Cleopatra VII, presumably through Drusilla. And it has also been speculated that Drusilla was an ancestor to the sisters Julia Domna and Julia Maesa, who were born into a priestly family in Emesa and married into the Severan dynasty of the Roman Empire. Julia Domna even became empress as the wife of Septimius Severus and was mother of Emperor Caracalla. Julia Maesa married a consul and was grandmother of the emperors Elagabalus and Severus Alexander. So it's entirely possible that descendants of Cleopatra and Mark Antony live among us today. However, it's pretty much impossible to prove. This is largely due to a lack of identifiable human remains belonging to Cleopatra or her children or immediate family that would allow us to trace their DNA. People have been looking for Cleopatra's tomb for a very long time. If you want to learn more about that, you can watch my video on that topic next. That's the end of our tour today, folks. What did you think? Did you learn something new? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video or subscribe to the channel before you leave. If you're feeling extra generous, you can give me a super thanks or give me a Ko-fi donation. And I just want to say that every watch, like, subscribe, and click helps my channel connect you directly to exciting archaeological stories like this one, and shows the algorithm that people are interested in learning about real archaeology. Thank you so much for watching. Stay curious, and I hope to see you on my next adventure inside archaeology.